So good morning, everybody. This is my pleasure to welcome you from all over the world to this inspiring panel discussion of Giving Women about the collaboration of academia, development organizations, the private sector to find innovative technical solutions for systemic change in gender equality. My name is Noémie Nagy, and I'm an enthusiastic member of Giving Women for almost 3 years. As an initiator of this event, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to open this panel discussion on behalf of Giving Women. For those of you who joined a Giving Women event for the first time, I would like to introduce our organization to you. Giving Women is a membership organization based in Geneva and Zurich. We are a community of women with diverse professional backgrounds. The organization was founded more than 11 years ago by Atalanti Moquet, who is with us today as always. The mission of our organization is to address the needs of women and girls in the most underdeveloped communities. We follow our mission through supporting women-focused organizations and projects worldwide. And we do it in a unique way. Instead of providing financial support, we offer our knowledge, professional experiences, and our network to advise on strategic development to help these organizations to be more efficient and more impactful. We also provide an educational program for our members to build skills and knowledge for a more professional philanthropy. And finally, we organize panel discussions, film screenings, and other events to raise awareness of gender-related issues. These events address the most pressing topics women and girls face around the world. And we also highlight different programs of organizations that work on solving those issues. We feel honored to serve as a platform to share insights, facilitate discussions, and build collaboration between the various stakeholders of the field. Today, we are going to talk about an inspiring topic that is very important for the work of Giving Women. And this is technology and collaboration. Together with our wonderful panelists and moderator, we would like to discuss how technology and innovation can serve humanitarian and development purposes with a special focus on gender equality. And also how collaboration between the nonprofit sector, the academia, and the private sector can foster innovative technical solutions for systemic change in gender equality. I'm pleased to introduce our amazing moderator, Dominika Bednarova, who is Humanitarian Innovation Advisor at Medair. You might actually know her as she was already speaking on Giving Women events earlier about innovative humanitarian approaches of Medair. Welcome, Dominika, and a warm welcome to our wonderful panelists. Ladies, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to this panel discussion. We really appreciate your contribution to the topic. And before I hand it over to Dominika, just a short reminder that we will be taking your questions at the end of the discussion. So please use the Q&A section to share your comments and remarks. And now over to you, Dominika. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noémie. Thank you, and a warm welcome to our panelists and our audience from my side as well. I will just very briefly introduce them and mention the organization for which they work. If not, I'm sure that you can all find their curriculums and contact details later in the chat. So make sure to research a little bit more about these three amazing women. So we have today with us Helen Davies, the Chief of Staff at Operation of Fistula. We have Beatrice Scarioni. She's the Head of Tech for Deaf at EPFL. And we have Deniz, the Director of Kona Connect. What we will be talking about, as Noémie said, we have an important topic to discuss. It's the technology and the collaboration around it that helps us to generate really positive impact for gender equality. When I was thinking about this topic earlier on, I was thinking like technology. For centuries, it had both excited the human imagination, but it also created the fears. And today, I think the technology cycle it's very similar. It provokes many hopes, but it also gives us these fears about what it can create. However, I think in its essence, the technology, it's neither good or bad. It's our use of it that really changes the impact it brings. You know, if I wake up in the morning and I'm extremely tired because I was scrolling the Instagram until 1 a.m., it's not the technology to blame, it's me. And if we then have technology that is really changing and saving lives, it's not the technology, but it's the work of our panelists that are to applaud. So I'm extremely, extremely happy to be part of this panel, to help to accompany this discussion, learn about their success stories, but also learn about the challenges they encounter in their work. I don't want to take more time talking about my thoughts and my scrolling of Instagram until 1 a.m. I will give the floor to our panelists and let's start a discussion right away. Helen, I actually see you on my screen, and it's very well because you are my first question I wanted to ask you. You go really to the most remote places, and you search for women who are often forgotten by their own communities where they live, and they suffer from something I never heard of before, fistula. You know, until I met you, I didn't know what it was. So please, just let's kick off with you telling us what fistula is and what is your organization, Operation Fistula, doing?
Thank you so much, Dominika, and thank you to this panel. I'm so excited to be here. You know, a lot of the premise of our work is that technology can be used as an incredible trigger for collaboration. So I couldn't be more excited to be talking about this. So Operation Fistula is on a mission to end obstetric fistula for every woman everywhere. One of the biggest challenges we face is that people haven't heard of fistula. They don't know what it is. And those that do know what fistula is are mostly off-put because they think a fistula is something a bit disgusting that they don't want to talk about. It makes them feel uncomfortable. So a lot of my sort of initial job here is to explain what it is. So an obstetric fistula is a childbirth injury that occurs when a woman experiences a prolonged obstructed labor, so often 2 or 3 days, without a medical intervention like a C-section or other emergency obstetric interventions. The trauma of the long labor causes tissue death and causes a hole to develop between the birth canal and the bladder or rectum, and leads to women suffering with uncontrolled incontinence. If that trauma wasn't enough, on top of this, in 90% of the cases where a fistula develops, the labor also results in a stillbirth. So it's an incredibly tragic injury. And despite a high impact and cost-effective solution, most of the women who get fistula live in very poor countries and won't be able to access the care they desperately need. There is a surgical intervention that can fix the hole. And it's why you don't hear about fistula in high income countries. It's why people and why a lot of the funders we work with have not necessarily engaged with the topic before. And yet fistula affects about 1 million women in the world's poorest countries. And it happens because the systems that should be helping these women and girls are broken. And the major reason why those systems are broken is because of gender inequality. So everything Operation Fistula does is designed to fix the system failures, the different elements of the system that have failed the women, that has then resulted in them developing a fistula. So there are systems that affect the individual woman in her journey to care. These are things like there isn't funding for surgeons to be able to deliver the care to the patients free of charge. There isn't quality management of her care. So there isn't monitoring of her outcome. There isn't follow-up. There isn't even data about where she is in the continuum of care. And there's also very little support for the woman to think about her quality of life beyond just the surgical intervention. So those are the things that affect the individual woman. But then there are these collective elements of the system that aren't working. So the first is obviously the thing that I've talked a lot about, which is that people don't know what fistula is. That's rampant in the countries where fistula is most prevalent. They don't know how to help the women who have it, and the women themselves who have the injury often don't realize it can be fixed. They think they've been cursed, they've lost their child, they've been rejected by their families, they're often very socially ostracized, and as a result live, as you said, in some of these very remote, hard to reach areas. And then on top of this, there's also very little understanding about how the broader system has failed, and how these broader system failures that are sociological, cultural, demographic, that are all contributing to the perpetuation of fistula, and what they are and how they happen, where they happen, all of that information. So our organization has designed a suite of tools that addresses all those different failures. So we provide funding to surgeons on the ground so that they can treat the women for free and treat the women who are in the backlog of cases that haven't been treated. We collect data from those surgeons so we can monitor the quality of the care that they're providing and verify that that care has been provided free of charge, and also as a way of advocating for the patient, right? We collect that data so that we can see the journey that she's had through the care journey. We ensure that communities are educated about fistula so that they can address it and treat women when fistula happens. We prioritize the patient voice and make sure that her goals for care are honored in the patient journey. So if she doesn't want the surgical intervention, we can help her with other interventions. And finally, we work with governments, multilaterals, and other NGOs to collect data and understand the collective system failures so that we can see how all of these different elements have conspired to sort of sustain the devastation that fistula causes. So that's kind of all of the work we do.
And that's basically all the work I can imagine. It's super complex, and really you look at it in such a holistic way that I wonder how you manage it all. But maybe now let's bring the technology into the discussion. Where does it play a role in your work? Can you maybe draw a comparison of pre-technology and post-technology? What does it allow you to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, when you ask this question, I struggle to think about a single area of our organization that technology hasn't improved. But I also think it's really important to talk about technology as a tool to enhance, improve, and strengthen systems and implementations. We don't do technology, right? Our programs use technology to enhance everything we do. So we've integrated different technologies. They all have very jargony names like Comcare and Ultrix, but we've integrated them throughout our programs. And it means that we can make really data-driven decision making. So the technologies we use have enabled us to drive deeper impact. So, for example, in the direct service provision that we do, finding, supporting, and enabling individual women on their journey to care. This could not use technology and data, right? There are plenty of organizations that don't. But for us, we collect data from every point in that journey. So our community teams go out into the community, they identify a woman, they collect information there, right in the village, right where she is, to the extent that we actually put GPS data information about exactly where she is, her house, we collect her contact information. Obviously, all of this is with the patient's consent, and we're very clear from the beginning of the process that the patient owns all of her data, but we're collecting across the whole journey, from the surgical intervention to follow-up care to reintegration. And what that enables us to do is understand where things aren't working, understand where we can build interconnections, where we can solve problems within the system, and as I said, drive deeper impact. One of the other examples we use is, for purely the surgical intervention, there are lots of surgeons in these countries who can treat fistula, but if we don't monitor their quality, how can we improve and train them so that they can deliver more complex surgeries? So by tracking their data points, we can then collect all that data and then send an international expert surgeon to deliver a training over a period of about 2 to 3 weeks. And that expert surgeon then goes with a record of these surgeons' performance and the specific things that need to be improved. So that's when you start getting into the conversation about how we're using technology to drive health system strengthening and actual capacity building within the system. But for the answer to your question about before and after, before we were using technologies like Tableau and Comcare, we were working with spreadsheets and manual data entry. This kind of data management is not only very highly prone to human error, but it's also just rows and columns of numbers, and it can't tell you anything very quickly, and it can't tell you very much unless you're really an expert data scientist. With Tableau, we can take all of those rows of numbers and those tiny points on a spreadsheet that nobody can understand, and we can create a visualization, and it's image and it's engaging, and you can click through to different data points. It all sounds very theoretical, I'm sure, to the audience, but a bit later on, we're going to actually show you one. So you can see what I'm talking about.
Let's discuss data, because I think data is like the buzzword that we hear everywhere. So I'm really interested to hear your opinion on that, because you are experts on data in Operation Fistula, I know that. But let's now maybe talk a little bit about COVID. And I know that everybody's tired about COVID and nobody wants to hear about it anymore, but the reality is it's impacting us greatly, and it impacted the work of Deniz and Kona Connect in a way that they couldn't imagine before. Deniz, with COVID-19, I know that the domestic violence started to be referred as the pandemic within a pandemic. Even before pandemic, 1 of 3 women in the world were suffering from domestic violence, physical or sexual. Now, with the lockdowns in basically every country of the world, I know that the hotlines for survivors of domestic violence are really experiencing more and more calls. So we know that pandemic created this aggravated pandemic of domestic violence. And I would like to know and to hear from you about how Kona Connect experienced the pandemic, and if actually COVID-19 was a catalyst of growth for your organization.
Yes, Dominika, thank you. And thank you again for this wonderful panel. We're so happy to be here with these esteemed panelists. Yes, COVID was, like many things, a crisis that served as a catalyst for innovation. So Kona Connect is a relatively young NGO connecting human rights and artificial intelligence to empower individuals in vulnerable situations through practical tools. And originally, we were working on a legal aid bot, but once we saw this kind of explosion of domestic violence, unfortunately, with the lockdowns, we turned our attention to developing a tool that would help domestic violence survivors who are trapped in their homes. So as first of its kind, Sophia is a chatbot available 24/7 to anyone suffering from domestic violence who needs assistance. Regardless of location, connecting with Sophia only requires a smartphone, computer, tablet with internet access. And so she's designed to be a trustworthy and guiding friend of survivors in 3 key ways, which we call GAL. It's easy to remember. The first is gathering evidence. So Sophia offers a vault space to survivors to upload potential evidence of abuse. Assess and know your rights. So it will provide kind of information about legal rights as survivors and what kind of resources they have access to as survivors. And finally, learn about your options. So connecting survivors with local domestic violence organizations and shelters doing the kind of on the ground work and who know the local practices, the local cultural expectations and laws. And so here maybe we can have, Kathleen, the graph that I sent just to kind of show people what it means, because often just like with Fistula, with chatbots, people think, oh my goodness, what is that? But really it's that's Sophia, our image there of the chatbot itself. And then you can see the person kind of engaging in the text with the chatbot, Sophia. And so the innovation of a chatbot is that it leaves no digital trace. So unlike apps, there are quite a number of apps on domestic violence. Apps can be accessed by the abusive partner, but Sophia does not require the use of a separate app. Instead, you access her through messaging apps that you already have, such as WhatsApp, Telegram, and you kind of search for her as you would a friend. So we kind of think of her as a virtual friend in that way. And then once you delete the conversation, there is no trace left on your device. And this is of utmost importance since controlling partners often demand access to a victim's digital devices. And so the reason this, I think under COVID especially, domestic violence survivors are often hesitant to reach out anyway, for obvious reasons. And so, you know, in one study found that, you know, 80% of survivors didn't reach out for help. So this is a way that survivors can actually get access to help in the privacy of their own home without such a high, you know, kind of wall that they have to climb over, right? It's immediately accessible. And so we saw a huge just interest in this project with volunteers. We had EPFL partner with us, you know, with the Tech for Dev program, also with the Digital Humanities Institute, having graduate students come work with us on a risk management plan. Zendesk, the software company, has offered us server space in perpetuity for the vault space. And the umbrella organization of domestic violence shelters in Switzerland is also quite interested in working with us on launching Sophia here. So whether it's Switzerland, Senegal, you know, Singapore, there is an interest in kind of developing these technologies for what has become an issue that I think is in the air a bit, right? Issues of domestic violence, of Me Too, of gender inequality in these terms. So we just saw a huge interest kind of explode in this in the past year.
And it's great to hear your example as a little spark of hope despite the statistics that are just sadder and sadder and worse, we see that Sophia really is bringing a solution. But speaking about the solution and the chatbot is an artificial intelligence way of speaking with someone, right? When the woman is typing in the mobile phone, it's not an actual human that is speaking with her, it's a technology. Right. And I know from my own experience that very often when you mention the use of technology in a humanitarian or development setting, people will tell you, it takes the human away from the humanitarian. It loses the human touch. And I think especially with, in case of survivors of domestic violence, it's so specific, every case is different. How do you make sure that you don't take the human out of humanitarian? How do you still keep the humanity in what you do?
Right. Well, I mean, that's definitely a great question and something that's come up when we've done outreach as well. But we don't, at Kona, and I think we probably share in this idea that we don't view technology as replacing human interaction, rather it enhances it or makes the interactions even more human in a lot of ways. Why? Because we are looking to connect survivors with local organizations already kind of doing the important work, often overworked, right? So we view Sophia as a way to almost free up space and time for them to do the important work of helping survivors without having to perhaps do all of the outreach or without having to try to find ways to connect with them in their homes. And so since Sophia is something that can easily be accessed, we actually view it as further enabling the kind of human-to-human interactions. So we really don't want survivors to spend too much time with Sophia. We want that to connect them and get them the help that the human organizations are doing. So we kind of view technology as a facilitator in that way, rather than the solution itself.
So it's enabling more humanity, actually, despite what you may think. Wow.
Exactly.
Really, really interesting. Yeah. Well, now let's move to the laboratories of one of the most prestigious and recognized technological universities of the world, EPFL. We have here in Lausanne, and we have Beatrice with us. And I want to ask you, Beatrice, you know, if I imagine scientists and academia, I always imagine people in white coats, locked in laboratories. And I'm like, how can they know what is happening on the ground? How can they find solutions for what is really needed? And I know that you in Tech for Dev, you are searching to bridge the theory and practice gap. And you are searching to really implement projects that will have a concrete impact in the global south. How do you do that? How do you make sure researchers know what is needed on the ground?
Thank you, Dominika, for the great question. And it's great to be here with all of you on such an important, I think, topic to discuss. So that was my same perception before I arrived to EPFL and started my sort of adventure there, about researchers in white vests with glasses and who never really go out of their lab. And in our space, technology and innovation is really the bread and butter of what we do as a technology engineering school. So what we try to do with the Tech for Dev program is really bring closer technology and innovation to, for example, NGOs or sort of the global south world. EPFL already had some sort of bilateral relations with the big international organizations such as the ICRC, for example, but we tried to put in place a collaborative platform, which we called the NGO Council, whereby different organizations, which are part of it, one of them is actually Kona Connect and Deniz, could really benefit from the innovations and the tech stemming out of over 370 labs working on different domains, from robotics to drone to physics. So we gathered these different actors at the time, a year and a half ago, it was 12 different NGOs, to really see sort of what their pain points and what their desires were when working with an academic institution. And one of my colleagues at EPFL has just released an interesting paper on it and calls it an unhappy marriage. So the academic vs NGO sort of relationship, but I think that is a little bit different. So we brought these organizations together in a place like EPFL. We sort of did an entire day, a workshop, and heard what their pain points were. And from this, we sort of kicked off the Tech for Dev program, where we try and bring together the tech expertise, which stems from sort of the researchers and the technology from EPFL, with the needs-based approach, which comes from the NGO council members. So with Tech for Dev, we're really trying to bridge the theory to practice gap by putting forward a needs-based approach. So the NGOs that are part of the council define what the needs are on the ground, so what the researchers can then sort of match with, and we launch a call for proposals for which researchers can directly respond with their technologies and innovations to the needs defined by the NGO council members.
Can you maybe give us a concrete example of a project that actually is impacting lives of women in the global south? Do you have an example where the need was matched with your solution?
Yes, so we have one of the recent Tech for Dev grantees is a cervical cancer prevention tool, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where each year we have over 300,000 women that die of cervical cancer, and this number is seen to double by 2035. So the issue there is obviously diagnosing such a medical condition. So this team, Professor Tiran, with sort of the Essential Tech Center at EPFL, is working on implementing obviously a smartphone-based solution that automatically detects cervical cancer from videos, for example. You know, smartphone penetration is actually quite significant in sub-Saharan Africa, so they will roll out this new device, which is going to impact, I think, this specific space, as we have nearly 85% of these deaths that occur in low and medium income countries.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you mean that the organization came up with the need and the solution, the technology was already in the middle of making, right, at EPFL, so you were really able to match it, or was the technology developed concretely for the need?
So there was the need was defined by the NGO in Cameroon, and they had sort of an initial relationship with the signal processing lab at EPFL. And hence they went ahead and actually sort of developed the technology together. And another important point with the Tech for Dev program is we fund technologies and innovations that are very far away from fundamental research. So we look at technologies that can sort of be tested and prototyped within 8 to 9 month time frame. So we try and bring technologies out of the lab and into the field where they're the most needed as quickly as possible.
So it's really what I call impact focused. It's great. Thanks, Beatrice. I think that all three of you are really in need of information, and information comes from data. So we all collect data. And when I think of data, I think it's like plastic in the ocean. There is too much of it. Nobody knows what to do with it. So I think really to get some use of the data, you need to know what to do with it. And I think this is, Helen, where you can tell us a little bit about the visualization of data that you are doing in Operation Fistula, because I saw a little bit of it. I find it fascinating, and I think that our audience would also love to hear more about how you use data to create the impact.
Absolutely, and you're completely right. Data doesn't do anyone any good if it's just stored in giant inaccessible spreadsheets and databases that can only be comprehended by someone with, a data science degree or a computer science degree. That kind of data, honestly, in our work, it's not much better than the vast medical record rooms that are filled with paper. You can't access analysis and insight from those big paper record rooms, but a spreadsheet or a database doesn't do you much good either. So we use data visualization. We use a tool called Tableau. And at this point, it would be probably easier if I show versus telling you the tool. So this is where the tech has to work. So give me a second. I'm just going to try. I'm going to share my screen. Okay.
Got your back if you need it.
Can you all see
Yes.
just a slide with Tableau written on it? Fantastic. So I just have the slide here because the next two slides are videos and I don't want to get ahead of myself. So what you'll see in these next slides are visualizations of different sets of data that we've worked with in our journey with Tableau. And it's really going to answer Dominika's question about how we know the data we're collecting is giving us good insights and is going to have impact. So I know I said this before, but fistula only happens in places where systems fail women and girls. I talked a bit about the different individual challenges and then also the collective system failures. So we were working with the government of Bangladesh, and let me just make sure the slide works. Oh no, hold on a second. So yeah, in 2018, we started working with the government of Bangladesh and we were digitizing paper records. So going to those vast paper record rooms and trying to get insights from the medical records. And we learned a lot about fistula, but we also learned that at this particular one facility that's represented on this visualization, that 1 out of every 3 of the patients, so 30% of the patients were married and pregnant before the age of 15. So let that sink in for a second. This is a space, this is a place where there is extreme gender-based violence. Not just that, but we also know that early marriage and early pregnancy are both things that contribute to continued fistula prevalence. So knowing this and being able to visualize it this quickly, you saw the cursor moving through the visualization, you got the insight, we can then share that with the government of Bangladesh, and then they can use that to drive a more targeted intervention. Much more powerful than a spreadsheet. So we saw this data and we thought, well, what if we looked at national level data on Bangladesh and aggregated the data from lots of different facilities? So we did that, and this is what we found. So in Bangladesh, lots of women are using the health facilities. This is great. They're using the health system. It's wonderful. But the quality of care hasn't kept pace with patient demand. So the government knows that about 34% of the fistula in Bangladesh are caused by a surgical mistake. They're called iatrogenic fistula. It's when in the process of an intervention, the scalpel nicks something and it causes the fistula. So it's a mistake. And they know that 34% of the fistula are caused by this mistake. But when we were visualizing the national level data, we found that in one region, in Kona, which was just selected, 65% of the cases in this region were caused by a surgical mistake, which then enables the government of Bangladesh, when they see the data and can share this with them, to be able to then target surgical training intervention in that region and in that place, because you can see that it's just disproportionately affecting people from there. So these are 2 examples of data visualizations that we use. I think I've now stopped sharing my screen, which is great. And just to sort of sum up, in answer to your question, like the data visualizations that I just showed you really show the 2 factors that have become incredibly central to our work. One, that fistula is caused by a perfect storm of system failure. And 2, that a major contributor to it is gender inequality. So as a result, we've taken, these are just 2 examples in one country. And we work in 18 countries at the moment and are collecting data across all of those places. And we found that fistula has huge predictive value when it comes to gender inequality. So because it is such an extreme thing to happen to a woman, there are so many things that have happened previously to developing a fistula that have caused this moment of extreme failure, that if we can map the places where fistula is present, we can then also share with governments, multilaterals, NGOs, all these other contributing factors, and create more targeted interventions for all of those aspects in addition to fistula. So we use data and data visualization to understand how the system failed, and it also is incredibly intuitive, right? Like you look at what I just showed you and you can get what's happening, but if I'd shown you the spreadsheet behind that visualization, nothing would have been helpful. It wouldn't have worked.
Exactly.
So
and without the data and technology, you would maybe be able to find the women and treat them, but you would never be able to do the advocacy and awareness rising at the international level. So really is the technology that allows us to take this cause to a much bigger level, create more impact, right?
Absolutely. And just to add one small thing, we often describe fistula as a maternal mortality you can interview. Because for a fistula to develop, there has to have been such an extreme level of failure that actually it's incredible in some ways that the woman didn't die. So if you really can understand what happened to her in her journey and how the fistula happened, you can actually help with loads of initiatives around sexual reproductive health and maternal mortality prevention.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Helen. Now let's figure a little bit about the digital divide, the elephant in the room. Deniz, and I will turn to you, because I think also a question came in the chat where Arzen asks, is there a plan to implement this type of tool in geographic areas with less or no internet connectivity? And it was actually a question that popped up in my mind. I was like, okay, if the technology is to help women, they have to be able to access it. Now, digital divide, women have less access to technologies than men. And to access Sophia, you need a phone and internet connection. Mm-hmm. Do the women that need to access it always have it? What is your experience, and how do you play around this topic of digital divide in Kona Connect?
Yeah, I think there's multiple dimensions to this, but with the issue of I think accessing kind of remote areas or poorer areas, it is important to keep in mind that technology usage does depend on where you are. So for instance, chatbot usage itself, while still in Europe a bit kind of, what's a chatbot again? I don't like those things. I had to use one on my bank's website. It's still somewhat of an amorphous thing, whereas in the Global South, when we worked on our EPFL application for the Tech for Dev program, we had a proposal working with a local nonprofit, the Yellow Movement in Ethiopia. And in Ethiopia, in fact, chatbot usage is huge because mobile technologies themselves are rapidly growing. And kind of in many places, there was a leap over, say, more conventional telephony in favor of the kind of smart cell phone usage. And so you find a wide variety of kind of varying, perhaps social classes, perhaps ethnic groups, local national contexts, but throughout there is a kind of global growth in mobile technologies. And so we've also looked into the possibility of, say, voice to text technologies for Sophia, for those who are less literate. But it certainly is an issue, and that brings me to the other aspect of the digital divide, in that we just don't know a lot about how individuals interface with such technologies, particularly in relation to gender. And I think Helen's, it's Helen, right? Yes. Wonderful, yeah. Wonderful explanation and kind of overview of the research highlights the importance of this kind of research. We simply don't know a lot about how women interact with chatbots, say. So there's a digital divide in what we actually know, right? And since knowledge is power, our hope with Sophia and potentially working with academia and the private sector would be to fill in those the research digital divide, right? To understand, who is logging in, using it, logging out, who is creating a vault, what's the demographic data? Are men using it? Are predominantly younger women engaging with this technology? So there's a lot of room there for addressing those kind of gaps in our research, but also the potential through these technologies to reach populations that traditionally we don't think of as having access to digital technologies. I think you find that actually a lot of places do have quite a bit of access to such technologies.
Yeah, where we would be surprised, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. I think the time is running, so now we have to jump into the topic of cooperation, because this is what we want to understand better in this panel discussion. And I think no innovation is ever created by one single person, and the impact you all are really bringing to the world is only possible because you are bringing the knowledge and experience of many external different actors. This makes me think about what is key for cooperation. And I would like to ask you, Beatrice, now to tell us a little bit from your experience on what are the key ingredients to a successful partnership between academia and the NGOs, because those two groups are so different that I can hardly sometimes imagine maybe how they talk to each other.
Yes, that's a great question. That's the million-dollar question. And I exchange quite a lot on that also with our fellow sort of partners at ETH as well, as to sort of what is the magic, or how can you make the magic happen in a way. I see there's mainly three main ingredients, and we're learning as well through the Tech for Dev program. But we see, for example, the first ingredient is really prioritizing a needs-based approach as opposed to the technology. We tend to put the technology first and then needs second. But it's very important that whatever technology or innovation we work on in the humanitarian sector needs to be beneficial in a specific context and needs to serve beneficiaries. So what I think is key when putting these two groups of people together is really putting the needs first, and this is how we sort of have the NGOs define them, and then adapting the technology and innovation second. The second ingredient, which is my personal, let's say, favorite one, is measurable impact from the very beginning. So for both the NGOs and the researchers, we devise tailored KPIs and impact metrics that they need to sort of respect throughout the 2-year grant process. So this is very important because it holds both parties accountable alongside the Global South partner. And we've also put in place an external monitoring platform, which we work with, that enables both the researchers and the NGOs to see sort of the impact they have on the ground. And the third sort of ingredient is this sort of milestone contingent payment. So we have the grant, which is unlocked in 2 stages, depending on whether these famous KPIs and milestones are achieved. So I think this is an interesting tool internally, sort of for both the NGO and the researcher to see how far they've come. But it's also sort of very interesting also sort of externally if you talk with potential donors or other stakeholders. So I would say these 3 ingredients are the most important ones. We're still sort of learning by doing. We hope with a future version of Tech for Dev, we can onboard even more collaborative projects. But let's say that if we thought this could be not an unhappy marriage, but a successful marriage before launching Tech for Dev, we're seeing how these 2 groups are very different, but highly complementary, which is very promising, I think, for the sector as a whole as well.
That's great. I hope that our audience was taking note of all the 3 key points that you mentioned, and we will be able to keep them in mind as we go in our work.
I still don't have the magic wand though, so I'm happy to hear if any other audience members or have any additional ingredients to add.
Yes. So our audience, please write in the chat your experience, and if you have any suggestions for all of us and for Beatrice at EPFL. Helen, what about you and the cooperation with private sector and that Operation Fistula is actually experiencing? I know that you partner with a private company, especially for the data visualization. And I mean, let's be honest, very often in the NGO sector, we speak the not-for-profit language, private sector speaks the for-profit language, then we come around the table and we don't necessarily find the same language to talk to each other. What is your experience? How do you make sure that you are working towards the same goal when NGO and private sector work together?
It's a really good question. I think with our partnership with Tableau, we've been really lucky both in the way that the partnership came about, and also in the fact that we work with the Tableau Foundation, which is the social impact philanthropy wing of Tableau, which means that it's staffed and managed and run by people who already are very confident and comfortable speaking in the nonprofit language.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is hugely beneficial to our partnership. But just to give some context and history about how this came about, when we first heard about Tableau, we were a tiny organization with one employee. And we were dealing with data entry, and it was manual and it was messy. And you know, our founder, I think, just came across this talk about how Tableau worked, and he just immediately knew, you know, this could make our data explode with insights. You know, this could be the thing that makes the difference. And so we didn't really know what to do. So we did some research, and we found that Tableau has a group called the Tableau Service Corps, which is a network of Tableau volunteers. And they're just people who are really passionate about data viz, and who also know that this is something that needs to be developed in the nonprofit sector. So they volunteer their time to come into NGOs and handle their data and show them how Tableau works and kind of train them up. So we hired a volunteer who worked with us. They immediately did, you know, showed the impact of the data visualization on our spreadsheets and stuff. And that's really, once we'd seen how it worked, we were able to start driving greater impact on the ground in our programs. But we also realized, you know, we really need to reach out to Tableau and say, your tool could have the most extraordinary impact on the lives of these vulnerable women and girls. And so we reached out to the foundation, and I think we were really set up by both the fact that they had this social and philanthropy wing of the organization, so they had already got that pre-existing commitment to social impact work, by the fact that we had worked with a volunteer, and so we had kind of really done our research and sort of done like the basic, you know, we'd all downloaded the free trial license and tested around with how it worked, and develop that internal capacity. And I think that showed the foundation that not only were we very serious about the power of the technology, but that also we were coming to them and saying, how can we make this go further? Like, how can we develop and learn and grow this capacity? And speaking of the digital divide, also consider the real responsibility of making sure that we're getting these tools to the people on the ground at the grassroots. One of our core values as an organization is the power of proximity. You know, it's all well and good if we're using these technologies to manage HQ, but we also need to be getting this impactful stuff to the people who are actually solving the problem on the ground.
Yeah.
So when we approached them, they kind of got it. You know, there was kind of a level of immediate, no, this makes sense. And they supported us. I mean, they've supported us hugely over the last, we're going into our 4th year of partnership with them. They give us access to the software, which would just be out of, you know, it's costly to use these really powerful business analytics tools. So they give us software licenses, they've given us training licenses. So everyone in our organization, no matter if you're not working, you know, everyone is using Tableau. We're using it across the whole organization. If you work for Fistula, you're going to be trained to use Tableau. We use it in all of our programs. All of our surgical partners are using it. All of our organizational partners get data vises. And we're also using it to track KPIs and all of these things. So it's been hugely transformative. But yeah, I think just to summarize, I would say if NGOs are wanting to reach out to corporations and for-profit groups for access to their tools or technologies or for funding support, I think just learning how they talk about their work and how they talk about what impact they aspire to make on the world will just help set you up for success.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's really just to be bold and ask, you know, sometimes we are so afraid, oh, we are a small NGO, but just say what you need. And actually, this is the one thing that I really love about the website of Kona Connect, because at the header, you have partnerships. And there is a phrase which I personally loved, and I will read it for you, which says, instead of getting tangled up in bureaucratic mazes, we partner with companies that can offer resources rather than cash to provide practical services to our projects. And this is so refreshing. And this is, I think, something that works very well, even now, especially with COVID. Maybe people don't have so much money to give, but there is still the knowledge and the experience. So Deniz, tell me a little bit more about what's the feedback of people to this request of yours? You are asking basically for gift in kind, gift of knowledge. Is it working or is it not working?
Yeah, for that, a special shout out to our founder, Rihanna Spring, who came up with that and who has been really at the forefront of recruiting volunteers and reaching out in that way. And just to echo Helen, I mean, absolutely, our relationship is very similar to theirs with Tableau, with Zendesk. And like you said, there's no harm in reaching out. So many private companies some have whole divisions just focused on working on these social issues. And many of them, I think, do want to have some input into solving social problems. And I think one benefit of being a nonprofit tech organization is a legal scholar recently told us that it's kind of sexy, right? When you do outreach to talk about AI and tech, and people, their ears perk up. And that's been new for me too, as someone coming from academia, not working in the field of tech per se. It has been interesting how much interest people showed. Not, of course, it's the mission as well, what we're trying to do with Sophia, but also I think the idea of bringing an adaptable technology, right? Because Sophia, the idea is that it can be adapted to kind of any national context, as long as you have the local organizations and the knowledgeable people to kind of input the relevant data. The bot itself can be adjusted for anywhere. So the notion of having different kinds of input from different institutions and individuals is what I think really has propelled Kona in the last year. It just wouldn't be possible without that. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, we wouldn't mind cash, but I do think just being focused on tech and AI has opened so many doors. And so I think maybe emphasizing that aspect of things to a certain degree can help with, in addition to speaking the language, as Helen said, to reach out to the private sector, because they do get kind of more excited by that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking about this gifting kind and the support that you need, Helen, I imagine that it's not easy to fundraise or to get support for the worst thing you never heard of, which Fistula is, and I refer to your website. And I know also that you were supported by Gaming Women. And as we have many of them in the audience, I would like to hear about your experience with that. Tell us a little bit more about how Gaming Women impacted Operation Fistula.
Oh, absolutely. Giving Women. So the story was, I was relatively new in the organization.
Oh, we lost
the organization. Oh, am I back? And I applied to be a project circle because we had this brainchild idea about what if we could create the systems change movement. So think back to that Bangladesh viz where it showed the failure of the surgeries and you could target resources across that health system. We were thinking, what if we could create a consortium of organizations, NGOs, corporations, people working on gender equality, and share this work with them and aggregate different data sets that they have and we have and that we were working on. And it was this really great idea, but it was very nebulous and it was kind of like, how do we start? And so I applied to the project to be a project cycle with Giving Women, just sort of laid it all out, this big idea, and they invited me to come and present, which was wonderful. And when I presented, everyone was very excited. And then nearly everyone said, yeah, but it's really confusing and it's too much information. And you're going to lose a lot of people because you're talking about all this jargony tech stuff. And so we went through this process of iterating on essentially a pitch document, essentially a concept note. And honestly, I've never had a group of such kind and yet absolutely like ruthless, feedbacking, precise people. And to be really frank, a lot of how we talk about our work now, the way that we talk about the tools that we use, the way that we're talking about the data, the way that I've talked on this call is a direct result of feedback and coaching by the project circle with Giving Women. Not just that, I would say as a woman in the nonprofit world, they are also the most incredible mentors. They are profound advocates and champions for not just our work as Fistula, but for me as a professional. Yeah, just second to none. I can't, Atalanta knows this. I could talk about it for a very long time.
Yeah, virtual applause for all the Giving Women that are in the panel today.
And can I shout out to Valeria? Valeria is my project circle leader and I love her.
Great, hi to Valeria. Beatrice, I think you're more on the side of giving the grants, giving the financial support to the projects. You are not in the position of Deniz and Helen, the grant seekers, and trying to really win the support. And I know that, and you mentioned it a little bit, the innovative way of funding that you have in Tech for Dev. You basically ask your project leaders to fulfill some kind of milestones. And that's very interesting for me, because from my own experience, I know that innovation and technology, it's implementation in the field. It's never a straight way forward. It's always challenges. We have to adapt, we have to change. How do you make sure you can commit to the funding, get some results, yet at the same time accompany those NGOs who may struggle on the way of really bringing impact via innovation to the field? Tell me more about your funding model.
Absolutely, yeah, with pleasure. And then just a small correction. I'm personally not the one that decides on who to give the grants. We have an independent expert panel, which we are very proud to say is composed of 6 exceptional women throughout different parts of the world that are really experts in bringing these technologies to where they are most needed. And they are the ones with whom we have a discussion, and they decide who the grant goes to. So after this, our funding model is very innovative, because we really wanted to sort of break silos and make both the NGOs and the researchers accountable to sort of the money they are receiving, right? So as I said before, the grant is unlocked based on sort of milestones and KPIs that are met. And these KPIs and milestones are agreed upon jointly, both by the researcher and the NGO. What we also do with our funding model in a different way is we infuse some entrepreneurial and innovation concepts right from the beginning. So together with my colleague Hilda, we have dedicated business model innovation workshops where we sort of mentor and coach all of the collaborative projects across sort of getting the technology to the field as quickly as possible, but hopefully making it an independent sort of social venture. We hope that after the 2-year grant period, they would have all the tools necessary for them to go out there and actually get dedicated funding, additional funding to scale the project even further. So if you sort of compare it in startup terms, we provide sort of a seed funding, and we sort of follow and mentor each of the projects, and we hold them accountable, obviously, to the KPIs and impact metrics. But what we also try and do differently is we infuse from the very beginning. So from day one, when they receive the grant, we go through dedicated workshops on sort of the social business model canvas, or seeing, for example, what other applications the technology has. So to give you a very practical example, we're working with sort of a hydrogen solar cooking model in Cameroon, and throughout this exercise they have found out that as a byproduct they have oxygen and water. So they're starting to think about how the oxygen sort of generated through this new service can actually help the hospitals in Cameroon with the COVID crisis. So this is a very sort of interesting way, and I think a different way to go about sort of funding such ideas, but we find it to be very beneficial for both the researcher and the NGO itself. And we find that sometimes the NGOs have more knowledge than the researchers themselves on this sort of entrepreneurship, innovation, business domain. Because obviously the researchers are not exposed to it being in an academic environment. Yeah,
very interesting. And I think the example of Tech for Dev, it's really an example of, I would call it innovative funding. We don't speak only about money we want to get, but also really the knowledge, the training, and the experience. So we are really moving into a new phase of what giving means and what it can really bring to those who need it. And really it's encouraging to know that even if someone doesn't necessarily have thousands of dollars to give, he can maybe help you even more with their experience.
And I think just to quickly mention, one of the other panelists mentioned systems change and systems change in the humanitarian innovation sector. I think in order to get to this sort of systems change, I think we need to radically rethink how we've been doing things in the past and how they can sort of be turned on its head for the future. So we try to obviously think about Tech for Dev with this lens. We are working on a Tech for Dev version 2.0, let's say, as of 2022. And for us, it's sort of very, very important to at least go in this direction or have this systems change as our North Star, as it's important sort of for Giving Women and other organizations. And the sector, I think, needs to actually go in that direction. I think it's not a choice anymore.
Absolutely. Looking at the time, let's now move to our audience. And a couple of questions, very interesting ones that are coming our way. I will read the one from Veronica Blecker, who is saying, "Thank you all for sharing. You truly do very important work. I was wondering how tech can be used to prevent gender inequality. Healing trauma is extremely important, but how can it be prevented?" I don't know if one of our panelists wants to jump on this topic.
I can have a go. So in terms of prevention, that's actually, we call our systems change work our prevention tool, because essentially we're collecting data points. There's demographic information, like I mentioned, like age at first marriage, age at first pregnancy, geographic distance from a health facility for a woman with fistula, but there's tons of this data out there in the world, not just the data that we're collecting. And when you start to put it together, you can essentially create a heat map of where all of these issues are most extreme and where they are most pronounced. And in terms of prevention efforts, what that can do is fuel and support prevention efforts that are not just direct support interventions, where you can go to perhaps a collaborating partner and say, hey, we were doing fistula work in this community, but we found that actually there's an enormous problem with gender-based violence and child marriage. And say, go to an organization like Girls Not Brides and say, look, we found this, here, take this data and go and use it for your work. So that's one element of prevention that it can support, but it can also support prevention in terms of global advocacy efforts, connecting the dots for people. You know, we struggle a lot with fistula being something that people don't know about and don't talk about. So when we can start to share these other data points and these interconnected vulnerabilities that the women we serve are experiencing, we can start to present and share with our community that there is this broader issue, and that can help fuel prevention efforts as well. We find that data visualization has really helped us with this prevention narrative, because it's a way of capturing the complexity that's both somehow granular enough to see that there's a problem to be solved, but that's broad brushstrokes enough for the global community to actually get that there's interconnected vulnerability in places.
So actually, and this is, I think, applicable also to Kona Connect and EPFL, you are always in the middle. And as far as you're linking with other external partners, other NGOs, you can always work in the direction of addressing it, but also in the direction of prevention. It's just to have the available data and to know who to talk to. That was great. Thanks, Helen. Sorry.
Could I interject?
Yeah.
I think the issue of gender inequality and solving it is, I mean, these are such large structural issues. I couldn't ever put forth and say, yes, you know, this chatbot will bring systemic change to gender inequality. However, I think we see that with technology, there are lots of ripple effects that we don't foresee necessarily always. And technology itself can be a driver of social change. And so I think over time, say, if knowledge about domestic violence and even what it is, part of Sophia just explains what it is, because a lot of people don't even realize they're in an abusive situation or a relationship. And so because knowledge is power, if there is a ripple effect, say, with such types of technologies to aid domestic violence survivors, then potentially see a change in the conversation about what actually constitutes domestic violence, what can be done how best to serve survivors, how best to prevent it. So I think it's difficult to say definitively that there is no effect like that. I think there very well could be. So.
Very well said. Thanks, Deniz. Beatrice, there is one question about EPFL, actually 2 questions, but let's look at the first one from Vladimir saying, does EPFL work with private sector in Tech for Dev program as well? So are you actually really closing the triangle of private sector, academia, NGOs, or are you mostly focused on NGOs, academia?
Yeah, I was just typing in the chat, but I'll answer it here. So we obviously, I think we are working with a lot of different stakeholders. So primarily NGOs through the Tech for Dev program, but we do not exclude corporations. So for the post, let's say 2022 Tech for Dev strategy, we're looking at how to incorporate corporates and how to sort of spark collaboration with them as of sort of the next version of the Tech for Dev 2.0 that I was mentioning before. We've seen that the collaboration with the NGOs has been quite interesting and successful, as to say, for now. I think now we need to sort of see how the corporations can fit in this picture, whether it's as a potential funder or as an implementer for these solutions. So I'm open to sort of inputs and feedback from Vladimir or others.
And what was the point that made you think we should bring in the private sector? Do you feel the gap in your current model, that you are missing someone around the table? Or?
So for now, I think in the stage that we're at, sort of in funding, sort of like early stage technology ideas and bringing them to the field, we feel like we have the 2 most important players, right? The NGOs and the researchers. I think that once these solutions have received the grant and the 2-year process is over, we'll need sort of someone to take over maybe some of the risk or some of the implementation to actually scale the technology further and bring it to other countries. So I feel like the private sector in this case could be very interesting. So I would say that there's definitely a space to this respect.
I think I know that you are doing a lot of super interesting projects with Tech for Dev, so maybe you can leave the website in the chat so our audience can check it out, and maybe there are some synergies and cooperations in perspective after this panel. Are there any other questions from our audience?
Another question for Beatrice, Beatrice, about how do you assign a researcher to a project? What are the criteria you use? That was from Sylvia Nussbaumer.
Yes, absolutely. So in this case, we have sort of the NGOs that submit the challenges on the field. So we had around 35 challenges for the second Tech for Dev call. And once these challenges are sort of shared with us, we put them on our website. So they're divided by topics. So whether it's healthcare or energy or materials. And then we have sort of researchers directly responding to the challenges. So they see that there is a fit, or we actually come in as a sort of an intermediary player, and we actually find out or help out sort of the batching between the researcher and the lab. So it's either the researcher that directly responds, or it's us. As we have a global overview, we do the matching. As to the selection of the grants, we have specific criteria, which I think I shared on the chat, which are based on sort of innovation, sort of use of the budget, etc. And what I forgot to mention is that 40% of the budget of the grant that we assign needs to be spent on the field. So it needs to go to capacity building or sort of purchase of equipment that needs to be spent outside of Switzerland and in the field where the technology is tested, whether it's sort of Kenya, Cameroon, Colombia, Bangladesh, etc., etc.
Amazing, thank you so much. I will ask one question because I think we haven't yet maybe talked the money enough. And one of our audience members, Blessing Rabor, is just wrote a comment in the chat, and he says, or she says, apologies, listening to the panelists, it's really hard to get funding for NGOs, especially in Nigeria. What is your experience? I don't know, Helen, what do you get? What do you need? Sometimes it's really hard for us to understand what actually goes behind the closed door in the NGOs. What are the funding flows? Just give us a picture of your operations and actually what do you need for example, 2021.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We are very lucky to have been funded by Grand Challenges.
Can't hear you.
We are losing you, Helen.
I think her connection.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that better? I think that might be just a buffering. Is that better now? It's
yeah, we can hear you. You're good.
Yeah, so we have Grand Challenges Canada, CRI, Tableau Foundation are big supporters of ours, among others. But especially, you know, in the post-COVID reality, one of the things that was primarily, honestly, because of our support from Grand Challenges Canada, which is supporting our biggest project in Madagascar, we were actually one of the few Fistula organizations to grow our work last year. A lot of our other folks in the sector had to pull back for funding for surgeries and funding direct impact work on the ground, just because COVID required surgeons to reprioritize pandemic response, health facilities were made into COVID units, all of this stuff. We knew that was going to have a direct impact on the women that we serve. So actually in December, we launched a new iteration of our funding program so that the surgeons on the ground who were previously being funded by entities that have now perhaps withdrawn their funding, were going to be able to have access to the funding that enables them to do a fistula repair. There are often, you know, the health system often funds the surgeon's salary, but then there are these prohibitive expenses that they are required to pay. For example, the anesthetist, the fistula repair kit, the hours in the operating room. And we've estimated that this comes out to be about $200 per surgery. So this isn't the end-to-end cost of a fistula repair, but it's the amount of money that makes the difference between a woman getting a repair and not. And so the condition of being part of this funding program is data entry and surgical quality monitoring and all of the things that I've discussed. But essentially, we launched this in December. We thought maybe 20 to 30 surgeons would apply to us. In 3 weeks, we had 120 applications from 29 countries. And there are eligibility requirements to be a surgeon in this program. You have to not be funded by any other funder. And out of that group, we've onboarded 59 surgeons from 18 countries. And we are just funding their repairs. We're projecting that they're going to do about 2,000 repairs this year. But when we launched this program, that's not what we budgeted. So we have this gap to fill, and we're just talking about it. You know, you said earlier, you're like, we've got to be bold in making the asks. So if anyone, you know, wants to make a difference today, the money we raise in this program goes directly to a surgeon. It doesn't cover our overhead. All of that's covered by philanthropy and other gifts. But that money goes direct to a surgeon to deliver a fistula repair. So if anyone wants to learn more about that, I'd be happy to have a call with them afterwards.
Perfect, Helen. And I think you left your contact details in the chat, right?
I'm just about to put.
Just about to. And I think there was some.
Include that in the follow-up email. We'll include their contact info.
Also, there was a lot of discussions in the chat regarding Sophia app and the Kona Connect. So I'm sure that Deniz will have new connections waiting for her in her email. But I think I have one more questions, and I think we should move on it as we are heading towards 2 p.m. in Switzerland. You know, I read a little bit of the Global Gender Gap Report 2020 before this panel. And if you read it, it really sadly tells us that none of us will see gender parity in our lifetime, because we need 99 more years to achieve it. And I was like, this is really depressing. But then listening to you, I really got the hope back, because I think we see more technology deployed in a very innovative way. And most of all, more cooperation. And I think there will be more and more surprises coming our way in what actually gender equality how gender equality can disappear if we know how to use technology and if we know how to use it in a collaborative way. So my last question for the panelists is, where do you see the for-profit and not for-profit distinction in 10 years from now? Do you think that actually the technology and collaborative technology can help us and can be the catalyst needed for a closer collaboration between academia, NGOs, private sector? Can we actually create one for good sector? In 10 years from now, if we meet again at this panel, where will we be? Who wants to start? Deniz.
Well, okay, yeah. I'm not on mute, so I guess well, it's interesting when I think about tech, it does seem like an opportunity for the lines between for-profit, nonprofit, academia to be a bit blurred. Just thinking of an automated chatbot, right? The findings that we get, potentially academic findings, let's say from studies where we launched Sophia, of how users interface with such a technology could then be adapted to the for-profit sector, right? So it's not even the for-profit sector potentially contributing money just to do good, but there could be ways that there are collaborations between the different sectors that would benefit all of them. That's probably the best way to go about ensuring continued support, right? That there is some sort of benefit. So I see technology as a way to kind of, because it's a tool that that's malleable, that can be adapted. I see ways that there could be partnerships. I guess the problem is the silos of these different fields. And as an academic, I can attest to there being huge silos just within academia itself. So I think programs like the Tech for Dev and the type of nonprofits like the one Helen works for that know how to speak across these types of boundaries, I think that's going to be kind of the forerunners in this effort at speaking across the aisle, so to say. There just has to be more of an effort towards consciously doing that. So, yeah.
So you say there is hope.
I think so. I think via technology, because there's so much that can be learned from it in a nonprofit way, in a for-profit, in academia, there are ways I think that there can be collaborations across. Yeah.
Amazing.
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
I was just going to completely agree with you. I think that technology can be so catalytic for specifically for impact partnerships. One of the things this was a really poignant question. I spent a lot of my weekend thinking about it. And one of the things that I'm deeply conscious of is that we have really, I think, been able to model these partnerships, not just with Tableau, but also with our surgeons on the ground, where we don't, our data collection technology is we just give it to people. They don't have to be funded by us. They don't have to have sort of any other engagement with us. We will just give them the data collection platform because we know that it's better than a paper record. It's better for the patient. It's better for the health system. It just helps everyone. And so we've given it to organizations, we've given it to individuals. And I think that means it's not just enabled us to have partnerships across different sectors, it's also helping us within our own sector do really safe data sharing and really collaborative work to actually solve the problem that we're primarily focused on. But then it has the power to expand these other conversations, right? With not just corporations, but with other NGOs, with multilaterals, with governments. But the only thing that I would just love to hear the other panelists' thoughts. One of the things that I can't get over is that there are fundamental economic differences in how nonprofits and for-profits function. And I think the for-profit space has done some phenomenal work with corporate philanthropy, CSR, employee volunteering, employee giving, all of these programs. But your question about in 10 years, where will we be? I just wonder how we can approach that economic conversation so that there are protections enshrined in the work for nonprofit organizations so that beneficiaries remain the primary shareholder in the nonprofit world.
Okay. Great, Helen. You answered my question with a question, which is a very clever way to answer, but I will write you an email and I will ask you to answer that question.
Maybe, yeah, to this respect, I think First of all, technology is not the silver bullet, right? I think this is very important to note. And second of all, I think we should not forget where we are based, especially if we think about it as EPFL, or if we think of Switzerland as a whole, and Greater Geneva area, and the UN being based there, and all the constellation of international organizations. I think we have a really big opportunity to actually dictate the agenda on this front. So I've seen a lot of players coming together, some successfully, others not so successfully, but I think it's time for us to really join forces and pioneer some cross-sectoral partnership for sort of humanitarian innovation at sort of the Swiss level, because we have all the ingredients. We have the academic institutions, we have the private sector, we have the NGOs. I think we're just lacking maybe willingness, and we should stop sort of working in silos, because we all have the same mission. Our mission is impact. So I mean, we're trying to sort of move the needle forward in a way that we can through Tech for Dev, but we can sort of create, I think it's really time to think about bigger opportunities and bigger funding, bigger players. So I imagine and dream of a cross-sectoral effort between different partners, with an epicenter in Geneva or Lausanne, which is the Humanitarian, let's say, tech hub. So I would be very happy to speak about this in 10 years' time, for example.
Well, excellent reflections. I think, Atalante, I leave it with you to schedule a meeting in 10 years so that we can follow up on what was said.
I've taken note.
Great. We are all waiting for the invite. Atalante, I heard you said a couple of days ago a phrase which I love, and you said, "We believe in the power of one and magic of many." And I think this is a phrase that just resumes our discussion. We saw the magic of collaboration, magic of cooperation. We saw the magic of many right here, right now. But I'm quoting you, and I realize you are with us. So I would like to give you a floor to maybe close us with some closing remarks, if you agree.
So first of all, I would like to thank Noemi for coming up with this idea, and our wonderful panelists that have given so honestly and so intelligently and so compassionately. Dominika, you were wonderful. Thank you so much. You got everybody to have an opportunity to say what they wanted to say. I'd also like to thank our participants. There's been an incredible exchange and sharing of knowledge on the chat. So not only what we're hearing, but also on the chat. It was difficult to keep track of everything that was going on. And I'd like to say that for me, this is exactly what Giving Women is trying to do. We have these panel discussions, and of course, the issue is to bring awareness to a broader public of the issues that women are facing, the solutions that have happened. But more importantly, for me, it is, and for the whole of Giving Women, I think it is bringing these people together. And when I've seen the exchanges on the chat of people wanting to work together and collaborate and find ways and sharing ideas, this is exactly what it's all about. It's not about staying in our silos. It's really going across and saying, okay, we can do this, but we can do it better if we do it together. So I have to say this was really an interesting, because we organized to do this event just after the Easter holidays. So we started saying the invitation, and I think everybody over Easter went offline. Nobody, we had very few signups, and we were thinking, oh God, we've really done this badly, whatever, and so on. So we've been pushing. Well, we've got a great audience, a totally engaged audience. So when something important is being said, people will come and listen. And I have to say, it's been really, really enlightening for me. And I just like to say, around the most difficult part, I think, for us to add to this conversation is the part about what is the role of private sector, what is the role of corporates. And I think that is a very, very difficult one to bring in. But I do think there are people out there who are trying to really make this happen, because the role of corporate is one where they can really help us to get greater reach. They can help us to go into places where they help us to get into places for Chatbot and Konica to get into those places where perhaps we couldn't, and with their support. And I know there's an organization which is really working on that, and that's the organization that's called Imagine. And that was set up by Paul Pullman, who was a big corporate player, and now is retired. And his real aim when he was working as head of Unilever, he really started to say, we have to look at the bottom line in a different way. And if we really want to make this world survive, we've got to move out of our silos. We've got to think of everything as being part, and everybody of being part of those solutions. So, and we had Paul come and speak on one of our conferences. And one of the questions that I asked him is, how are you getting corporates to engage? Because that's a difficult thing. How do you get corporates to engage? How do you get them to buy in? Because CSR is all well and good, but that's not making systemic change. And he said to me, all I need is 30% of the corporates to get involved. Then we can create the magic. And so I leave you with that thought. And I think we do need to reach out to those corporates and get them to join us in getting those things in place. So I'd like to thank everybody. I see Delia on my screen. Hi, Delia, who's been super active on giving ideas, sharing ideas, an old friend, both of Giving in Women and myself. We've had some wonderful exchanges, and I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved in putting this really, really excellent panel together. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll grab the chat and sort of clean it up and also make that available, because there are a lot of ideas and resources given there. So we'll include that in the follow-up email that will go out with the recording as well. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm uploading.
Thank you.